Look, we're very pleased that today, as you can see, we've got quite a different format, but we're very pleased to start it up with James Merlino. James Merlino, of course, is the Opposition Spokesperson for Education and Deputy Leader of the Opposition, and he's going to give us his vision for the next 4 years for public education. So please welcome James Merlino.
Thank you very much, and good morning everyone. I know this is day 2 of your conference, so you're all looking pretty well, not too many bleary eyes out in the audience. Can I acknowledge Frank Sell and all of you as members of VASSP? Can I acknowledge some familiar faces from my own community, Margaret and Wayne and a few others. It's great to see you here today. Can I acknowledge the work of VASSP in advocating on behalf of state secondary schools? VASSP, for me personally, has been a source of great advice, particularly over the last 18 months, 2 years, as we work on the development of our policies that we want to take to the next election. So thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. Now, I've been asked to outline Labor's vision over the next 4 years, and it's a bit of a tricky one given the timing. We're about 108 days to the election, 108 days. And so whilst we're making the finishing touches to our policy, they'll be progressively announced over the next few months. So I can't telegraph our punches at this forum here this morning. We've been making a number of significant local announcements over the course of the last 3 or 4 weeks. And we'll be making some big ticket announcements, universal policy announcements over the course of September, October, and then during the course of the election. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about what we've got in store, and there's some quite exciting things, but I will talk broadly. And as we get closer to the election, hopefully there'll be more opportunities to engage individually with schools and more broadly with VASSP. I think this event also provides an opportune moment to reflect on the past 4 years and the actions of the coalition government as we approach the state election on the 29th of November. And I'm going to be a bit political. With 108 days to go, I don't think you would expect me to be anything but I will be a bit political this morning. So let's start just before the 2010 election. The then Leader of the Opposition, Ted Baillieu, promised you all that Victorian teachers would be, quote, the best paid teachers in Australia. And we all know where that ended. Not only was that commitment not honoured, but the government took the opportunity of EBA negotiations to launch a full-on offensive on the teaching profession, questioning their ability and commitment to the important work of educating our younger generations. And my view is that it's been downhill ever since. I'm speaking this morning before an audience of men and women who don't just value the concept of education, but who have chosen to make it their life's work. It's a rewarding profession. It's a noble profession. Principals and teachers know the real value of their work. They can measure it, and they can be sure of it when they get home at night. But it is not enough. It is not enough that educators alone appreciate what educators do. There is an obligation on government to make a difference. I believe the responsibility of educating a child is beyond measure. I believe that government should be there to help with that responsibility, not hinder it. Government should help families and educators with that task. A government should do what it can to make the school life easier for them. Government should support the students who have difficulties at school, support parents who struggle with the cost of education, and support principals and teachers, the head, the heart and the soul of our education system. A government must do these things because all children deserve the opportunity to learn and to achieve their full potential. There is a moral purpose to what you do as educators. There is a moral purpose to what public servants do within the Department of Education. There is a moral purpose to what ministers and shadow ministers do in education. I'm not here today to make you promises that I cannot keep, but I can tell you this: Daniel Andrews and I, and the Labor opposition, the alternative government, are committed to the quality provision of public education. And my immediate priority, if elected, will be to work to restore the damage done across the sector by Dennis Napthine and his government. Have you ever heard Dennis Napthine or Martin Dixon, I understand he spoke here yesterday morning, have you ever heard Dennis Napthine or Martin Dixon actively promote or defend public education? The answer is no, for the simple reason that they do not believe in it. And I'm here to say to you today that we do, that the Labor opposition does. And in many ways, that's my most important message for you here this morning. You know, the detail of the policy will be released over the course of the next 100 days or so. But the message for you this morning is that the Labor opposition values public education, values our state schools, respects our principals and our teachers who work in the public system. Now, we may not get it right. We make mistakes, and we made mistakes during the 11 years that we were in office between 1999 and 2010. We made mistakes. But we had senior people around the cabinet table who were education ministers. John Lenders, Lynn Kosky, Bronwyn Pike, senior members of the cabinet who are involved in the Expenditure Review Committee process. There has not been an education minister in the Labor government that is not around the table when decisions are made about funding. Government is about choices. Every single budget are about choices. There are more prison beds in this year's budget than there are hospital beds. These are choices of governments. Particularly in our context here in Australia, we're not talking about austerity budgets in Europe post the GFC. There is plenty of new spending in state and federal budgets here in Australia. These are choices of government. I'm the deputy leader, and I say this often when I speak publicly. The single greatest thing about being the deputy leader of the Labor Party is that he or she gets to choose his or her portfolio. Usually it's the leader that allocates the portfolios for their cabinet or shadow cabinet team. The deputy gets to choose. And I chose education. I wanted education when we lost back in 2010. And I called Daniel and he said, Rob Holes, the deputy leader, at the time, he wanted education, so he was going to get it. So I had to wait till Rob Holes announced his retirement. I put my hand up to the deputy and I said, I want education. So my message here this morning is twofold. We value public education, we value our public schools. We want to see every public school in Victoria be a great school, be a school of choice for their local community. And the people that will implement this priority will be senior members around the cabinet table. Not nice people, but people who are then told by Premier and Cabinet and by the Treasurer, you go find hundreds of millions of dollars of saving every single budget, year after year after year, which is what we've had under this current government. Almost $1 billion cut out of the education budget over the last 4 years. And those ministers delivered on those cuts. Labor values the work that teachers do in our state schools and understand that educators are passionate about their students and about their outcomes. And we recognise that a good outcome and improvement from one student is not necessarily comparable to another. There are high community expectations of our schools and of our principals and teachers. I know that I have them. I have high expectations, and so there should be. There should be high expectations between a minister and the education system that he or she is responsible for. There should be high expectations of principals to the teachers that work in their schools. There should be high expectations of the teachers to their students. There should be high expectations of parents for their local school and the education they provide for their kids. There should be high expectations amongst the students themselves that they can achieve and they should achieve. So I won't shy away from that, but that comes from a place of wanting the best results for our students, and I know that's something that you also want. So everyone is on the same page here in this room, but my view is that the Napthine government is not on this same page. When it comes to the teaching profession and improving the quality of teaching, the problem with the current government's approach is that there's been no attention at all to development in the phrase performance and development. There's been an attempt to ram through a performance process and giving you as principals no time at all to deliver on it. The problem with the current government is their bizarre expectation that the outcomes in our schools would improve, whilst at the same time they are systematically undermining the system by cutting the funding to important programs, both in schools and in terms of the reduction of the support provided by regions. And it's made even harder when the government sees educators themselves as the problem, not the solution. When it sees schools as something that needs to be managed instead of nourished, tested rather than supported and trusted, where the word autonomy rolls easily off the tongue. But we all know that that is code for all of the responsibility, all of the accountability, all of the compliance on the shoulders of principals, and no support being provided by the department or the regions. A common feedback, a common message I've been getting from principals across the last almost 3 years that I've been Shadow Education Minister, principals telling me that they have never felt more isolated. Experienced principals telling me, thank goodness I am not a new principal starting in the system today. Thank goodness I've got experience to back me up that whilst I'm alone, I've got the experience to make my way through as best as I can. The government failed to see education as investment. Money invested in our schools is invested in the future of our children, and the investment will pay off many times over. This is why we see education spending as a priority investment and as a key opportunity in life. Opportunity to get a job, to earn a decent wage, to participate in society. Outside of the family, education is the greatest influence on the trajectory of our lives. It is the single greatest influence outside your own family home. It is very hard to do these things, to achieve our full potential without the grounding that a good education gives you. I believe all of this, and I thought it self-evident. Yet the Bayu Napthine government has cut funding out of our education system, budget after budget after budget, around $1 billion out of education, twice that when you include the cuts to TAFE. It just doesn't make sense. Millions scrapped from schools, from families and from communities. So many important programs lost. The ones which got kids to class and got them learning. The cuts, as you know more than I, have been wide and deep. And you've heard it all before, but I just want to summarise a few of them. The school start bonus, a vital payment to cover the cost of starting primary and secondary school. The education maintenance allowance, helping vulnerable families for the cost of books, excursions and camps for families that can't afford it for the children. This is the last year, if the Napthine government is re-elected on the 29th of November, this is the last year of the education maintenance allowance. It has gone. The conveyance allowance, which gets kids from school, from bus to and from school if they live in remote areas. The school-focused youth service, vehicle coordination, reading recovery, the list goes on and on and on. And sadly, this is against a backdrop of the failure of Dennis Napthine to stand up to Tony Abbott and secure Gonski funding for Victorian schools. All the big dollars are in years 5 and 6 of that agreement. But years 5 and 6 aren't being funded by the federal government. They've walked away from the opportunity that the Gonski review and the Gonski deal offered, and it is shameful. Even worse, from the Victorian Government's perspective, they are failing to uphold their end of the agreement. During our state budget hearings, the pay-out hearings post the release of the state budget earlier this year, our Labor committee members on that committee spent more than an hour questioning Martin Dixon on where the additional state money for schools was under the National Gonski Agreement. The money they committed to when they finally signed up to the Gonski deal. Martin Dixon could not tell the Labor members of that committee where the Gonski funding was. He couldn't point. Seriously, you should have a look at the transcript of the Public Accounts and Estimates hearing. Martin Dixon could not point to one single dollar. He could not point to one single program that was in any way related to the national agreement that this state signed up to. Not $1, not one program. So I put it to you that both the NAPFINE and Abbott governments are walking away from Gonski. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The most significant review of public funding of our school system in over 4 decades, clearly outlining the link between disadvantage and poor educational outcomes, and highlighting the fact that where you have concentration of disadvantage, how much more that impacts on poor educational outcomes. Needs-based funding, sector blind, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that has almost been lost. And I'm sure those of you here today haven't noticed any significant increase in your SRP this year for anything other than enrolment growth anyway. In fact, if you were previously a party to a national partnership funding, you might even be getting less than you were in recent years. So this once-in-a-generation opportunity to invest in our children's future might have just slipped by. We'll see over the course of the next few years. We'll certainly be committed to needs-based funding, committed to the priorities, to the themes, to the issues that were identified under the Gonski Review. And we will stand up. We won't walk hand in glove with Tony Abbott. We'll work with him, but where we need to, we'll stand up to him and we'll fight for the best outcome for Victorian schools. And you never know, it might remain an issue in the lead up to the next federal election. That's what we've got to work for. Moving on from things that happen inside our schools to the environment that is provided for children to learning. The investment over this term of government in our educational assets has been woeful. The funding for school buildings, for new schools, for upgrades for existing schools around the state has nosedived. The government is spending only half what is needed. It is a very stark, graphic reminder of how they value public education. The figures are there. This is not a politician spinning around the issue. It's in black and white in the budget papers. There is the average spend of this government is $278 million, compared with the previous Labor government's last 4 years in office, average of $467 million. Almost half is invested in our schools compared to the previous Labor government. And that comparison, that puts aside all of the federal money, all of the BER investment in our schools. We are just talking about state dollars, $278 million compared to $467 million. So we've begun making some election commitments to schools around the state who have the need and have been waiting 4 years, who have been shamefully overlooked by this government. Schools like Essendon Keilor College, like Greensborough Secondary College. The Minister Dixon visited Essendon Keilor a few years ago, and he said the state of that school was, quote, disgusting. Yet provided not $1 in the budget that followed those comments, provided not $1 in the budget that followed the following year. But we made a commitment to Essendon Keilor College. And immediately after speaking to you here this morning, I'm off to Tarnee to make a major announcement for Tarnee Peter 9, $10 million commitment for Stage 2 funding for that school. A school that was half built and then abandoned by this government in a growth area. portables being ripped out of schools right across the state and then dumped in schools in growth corridors because the investment has not been there. Stage 2 hasn't followed Stage 1, and that example is repeated many times right across the state. I'm not suggesting that Labor can fix every school with one round of election commitments, but getting back on track, getting back to the schools that were left behind when the government scrapped the Victorian Schools Plan, and others that have developed needs since, they are our priority. I'm almost out of time, but I just wanted to quickly mention one more thing. There's many things to talk about, but one more thing about the education department regions. We used to have 9, there are now 4. One region is responsible for every school from Footscray to Horsham, from Coburg to Mildura, from Box Hill to Wodonga, from Paran to Mallacoota. If you think that sounds ridiculous and unworkable, that's because it is. And you know that more than anyone else in the state. The loss of support, the loss of corporate knowledge when the regions were decimated cannot be gotten back easily. But resourcing regions to support schools in the region where they operate would be a start. It would mean that when a principal phones up a region for support or advice, they could actually find someone on the other end of the phone with a bit of local knowledge that could actually help them. It would mean that the pressure that regions are under to provide assistance to schools for things that they don't encounter every day of the week, like security scares or removing asbestos, could actually be provided. We understand that support is needed and we want to see that support restored to schools around the state. And further to that, Labor understands that most children with special needs are educated in our government system. We feel very strongly about providing better support to schools who support these students. Schools like Emerald Secondary College. I took Daniel Andrews to the school to have a look at how our government schools are supporting students with additional needs so that they can reach their full potential and be equipped to live a long, rewarding life, whatever that may be. So we've got some exciting announcements to come over a range of areas. Transition from senior secondary through to TAFE, tertiary, or a job. Early years investment, probably run out of time to talk about early years, but two big areas of reform as I see it, early years education and that transition from secondary to TAFE, tertiary, jobs that are relevant to the region in which that child lives. So we've got some big announcements to come. So I did want to outline here this morning the battles that we are fighting on so many fronts when it comes to education. I know that you're aware of this, and it's important to put this government, this election, in the context of the damage that has been done and the implication for those who work in the sector, but also for those who depend on it for their future quality of life. The way I've talked about it today sounds like it's a big task to get things back on track, and it is, but we won't back away from the challenge. There is a fundamental difference between Labor and Liberal in many ways, but none so stark as when you compare our commitment to basic services like health and education. These are our first priorities. They are not the first priority of the current government, and they are not part of their political ideology in the way that they are for Labor. Our education is not just numbers on a page that can be cut back with no effect when economic times are tough. It's more than that. It is everything. It gives meaning and structure and opportunity to the life of every student. It is a livelihood for every principal and teacher and a passion for almost every single principal and teacher. It is a priority for every single parent. Every government should understand that. This one doesn't. And my task over the next 108 days is to convince the community that the alternative government does. Thanks for having me here this morning.